News 8, your local election headquarters.
All right, tonight's key race, the race for the Republican Senate seat here in Indiana. Here's the numbers as they are being reported, with 88% of the precincts reporting Mike Braun winning with 41% of the vote.
Braun will now face current Senator Joe Donnelly in the general election in November. We have crews with all of the GOP Senate candidates tonight, but let's begin with Megan Sanctorum, who has been with Mike Braun all night. Megan, good evening.
Good evening, Brooke. Yeah, there is a lot of excitement here at Mike Braun's watch party tonight. Obviously, they just declared victory a short time ago. A lot of his supporters are still here. They are still mingling, still talking to him, excited about this big win in the primary race. Now, Braun ran his campaign working to set himself apart from his opponents Todd Rokita and Luke Messer, and it looks like that message resonated with voters. Braun identified himself as a career businessman rather than a career politician, which is what he called his opponents. He did mention them in his speech tonight. He said he's hoping they'll support him in this campaign moving forward, saying all three of them have the same goal, and that is defeating Joe Donnelly. He said he knows there's still a lot of work to be done before November, but he has a plan, and he says once again he thinks he can win by focusing on his past and his accomplishments in the business sector.
A guy that has lived conservatism in the trenches. I was a small business for 17 years, and I'm going to talk about the American dream and how you do things in your own community to make good livelihoods for your employees, and how you do something, I hope, that is still the American dream as opposed to looking to government to solve your problems.
We will have more from him coming up tonight at both 10:30 and 11. Stay with us. Reporting live in Whitestown, I'm Megan Sanctorum, 24-Hour News 8.
All right, Megan, thank you.
And 24-Hour News 8's Eric Feldman has been at Representative Luke Messer's campaign headquarters. Eric, I can imagine what the feeling's like there.
Yeah, Mike, you know, obviously disappointment here, but a lot of the staff and even the Messer family, they're still here talking with supporters in the wake of this defeat. And when Congressman Messer came here around 8:45, there was a huge roar from his supporters and his campaign staff as he entered with his family again about a little over an hour ago. And he did decline to speak with the media, but he did speak with supporters and address them for a couple minutes. And he talked about how important it was to have the entire campaign team on his side, and he said that without their efforts, who knows where they would have been. He also talked about the importance of his family and having their support. And you've seen his campaign signs. They say, "I like Luke." He says even though it's his name on the campaign sign, it takes a whole family of support and effort and guidance in order to make sure that there is a successful run for political office. So he was very thankful for both the supporters and for his family. But when it came to the outcome, obviously lots of disappointment. Here's a short clip from what he said to his supporters.
We're, of course, disappointed with the results of this election, but as Jennifer was saying to me over the weekend, look, you know, we are very confident that God has great plans ahead for our nation, our state, and the Messer family.
Now, Messer did not say in his speech whether he congratulated or called or would support Mike Braun in his run in the general election, but when we talked with his campaign manager after, he confirmed that he did call him and congratulate him, and he does intend to support him against Joe Donnelly in the general election. Of course, that will happen in November. Now, this is a big election to talk about, an enormous loss. 2 sitting U.S. congressmen losing to Mike Braun, a man who has never held an elected position in Washington, D.C. So we asked the campaign, what do you think happened? They talked about Braun's spending. They said they were outspent 3-1, and they said it was that key spending that put him over the hump and made him the nominee for the Republican Party to face off against Joe Donnelly. Now, we have a lot more to talk about, and you'll hear from Luke Messer coming up at 11 o'clock, getting emotional about his time in Washington, D.C. But for now, we're going to send it over to the Congressman Todd Rokita watch party, where our State House Bureau Chief David Williams is standing by. David, what are you hearing over there?
This was a stunning upset tonight. People here did not expect Mr. Rokita to concede defeat in this leg of the U.S. Senate race. People are continuing to leave the watch party tonight just outside the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Just a couple hours ago, we saw long faces on people wiping tears away and even people crying. You could even see the emotion on Todd Rokita's face as he was addressing his supporters. But that excitement that was earlier today, that turned into tears about a half an hour ago. Now, we saw people crying as well as that emotion again on Todd Rokita's face. One thing he talked about was the support that he had from his family and how hard he says he fought for Hoosiers. You remember in his campaign, he tried very hard to align himself with President Trump, saying he was pro-Trump, pro-life, pro-gun. And he also mentioned his stance on immigration, but he tried to make himself in accord with President Trump. I want to play for you a snippet of his speech to supporters as well as one of his supporters. Here's what they both said.
Not every fight is fair. Not every candidate can stroke a personal $6 million check. But that's life. The result tonight was different than we had hoped. But I will continue to fight for you.
I think money, I mean, he was outspent by so much money. But I think a lot of people got mixed up and they forgot who Todd really was and how he fought for us.
Now, there was a poignant moment during that concession speech where Rokita congratulated Mike Braun on his win tonight and said he honestly hopes that Braun can be the one to fight in Washington for Hoosiers. And he said he expects and hopes Braun wouldn't wage an expensive media campaign. You'll hear more from Mr. Rokita tonight at 11. For now, I'm David Williams, live just outside the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. 24-hour News 8.
All right, David, thank you. Let's break down what this all means. Political analyst and Dr. Josh Skaka with us right now from Purdue University.
Yeah, so we want to talk about this race. It was an interesting one. Mike Braun won handily tonight. Was that expected?
I think in some ways when you have two candidates, Congressman Messer and Congressman Rokita, who are attacking each other for months on end, oftentimes this is what happens, which is the third candidate in the race benefits. And by the time the two candidates realized what was happening in terms of Braun, it was too late to really try to bring him down at that point.
Yeah, I think we saw this in the debate. You brought it up earlier, Brooke, the fact that the two of them were kind of ganging up on Braun, and it seemed to kind of work in Braun's favor in this particular instance.
Absolutely. What you have here is you have essentially each candidate tried to out-Trump Donald Trump. And the winner tonight is actually, in a lot of ways, very close in profile to Donald Trump, a business person who also has a very mixed political history of supporting, at least voting in Democratic primaries. And those particular attacks against Mike Braun didn't work. And I think what you saw tonight is this was really, you have two congressmen who are looked at as the political elite. So Congressman Rokita's defeat the elite in terms of his campaign motto didn't work. He was the elite. And Braun was looked at as the non-elite person in this race. So
let's talk about November, because it'll be here before we know it. Braun will be facing incumbent Democrat Joe Donnelly. This is a seat the GOP needs to regain. What is going to be the strategy here? Yeah, so what you're going to see is Mike Braun immediately pivot to the center here. And in a lot of ways, I think this will be a fairly easy move for him to make, more so than it would have been for Congressmen Messer and Rokita. And you're going to see Joe Donnelly as well. He's already been tacking to the center, talking about the fact that he's an independent voice in the Senate. And so you're going to see a very competitive race. I think national Republicans are probably very happy tonight. Braun is probably the most electable Republican in the race going into November. All right, Josh, I know you're going to stick around for a little bit. We'll talk to you in the next half hour. Lots to talk about in all these races that are going on around the state tonight. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, speaking of Senator Joe Donnelly, he is offering his congratulations to Mike Braun tonight. He says Indiana voters will now have to decide for themselves who's willing to fight for Hoosiers. Take a listen.
Who'll be an independent voice for Indiana? The people of Indiana are my boss, no one else. That's who I work for. That's the most basic job description of a United States senator. You don't work for a president. You don't work for a party. You work for the people of Indiana.
So Donnelly says he